Hello guys and welcome back to the channel, Thai Talk with Dan. Now today's story guys, people don't normally admit this, but I know that it happens. Now we probably will be distracted by the little guy here. Say hello. Hello. Yeah, good boy. Go play. But we'll try and crack on with the story anyway and do our best. Now, in today's story, I know that it goes on that people come to Thailand, leave the wives and kids, hey mate, leave the wives and kids, fly over to Thailand, say they're travelling around and just being normal, travelling Southeast Asia, etc. But in reality, they're here to play. Going to be a difficult one, this one, guys. My name is Davey and I'm from Galway in Ireland. In 2013 I was 47 years old and married with 4 young children. I got the go-ahead from my wife of 10 years to meet my friends Bill and Ryan for a last-minute trip to Pattaya in Thailand. It was also my first trip to Thailand. I told my wife I was travelling around Thailand and other Southeast Asian countries so that she wouldn't think I was solely based in Pattaya. I eagerly packed my bags and next day I flew out to Bangkok and then got a taxi straight to Pattaya to meet my 2 friends. We all booked into a nice 4-star hotel near Walking Street. Now on the first night, we went straight out to party and hit the bar scene hard and caught up on old times. It was a real eye-opener and the sight of all those beautiful bar girls blew my mind. A great night was had by all and we all made it back to the hotel without any girls. The next day was the same, but this time I spotted this beautiful young bar girl across from me in a bar in Soi 6. You know the type, long black hair, makeup perfect and stunningly beautiful. Unfortunately for me, my friend Ryan also spotted her and he went straight over to her to chat her up. Fortunately, the girl whose name was Jo wasn't very friendly to him. I decided to ask the mama-san to give the girl a message saying that I would like to buy her a drink. She smiled over at me and I was immediately hooked. She came over next to me and we began chatting. She told me she was 18 years old and from Isan and had been working in the bar for 3 months and only done it to help the family up north. So I paid her bar fine and we went bar crawling together and had amazing boom boom later. I spent the next 10 days with her and we were inseparable. I had become a love-struck Falang, and before I headed home to Ireland, she told me that she would be waiting for me to return in a few months. What was eating me up the most was the thought of her going with other customers, and the possibility of her meeting a rich Falang who would whisk her off her feet. After all, money talks and Falang walks, right? The morning of our departure arrived, and Ben and Ryan were in reception waiting on me. Eventually, I turned up after saying goodbye to Jo. My friends took one look at me and realised my heart was breaking having to leave. They busted my balls all the way to the airport. I got zero sympathy. I hadn't even got to the airport and I was calling Jo on the phone, telling her how much I missed and loved her and that I'd call her every day from Ireland. When we finally landed in Dublin, we had to travel 2 hours by car to Galway, in the west of Ireland. I was dreading going home, and my friends seeing me like this just told me to cop on and that I would forget her by the end of the week. After all, what were my options? I made it home to find my wife and 4 kids all excited to see me, but my wife noticed how depressed and distant I looked and asked me what was wrong. I immediately put it down to the long flight and the thought of going back to work, and she was cool with that. My mate Ben was immigrating to Australia a few days later, and I met him for a beer before he went. Ben realised that I was still love-struck from Thailand and hadn't got over it. I told Ben that my head was all over the place and that I was snappy with the wife and kids and couldn't get Joe out of my head. I told him I called Joe every day and used the excuse of me going for a walk to clear my head. Now Ben just told me to get over it, as I didn't have any options. He distinctly tells me to cop on to myself and not to contact Joe again, and to keep busy and go for long walks to shake the depression. I told him I would, and that I knew I hadn't really got any options. With that, we said our goodbyes, and Ben said he would contact me when he gets settled in Australia. A week had passed and I called Ben, saying I couldn't get over Joe and depression was kicking in and I was thinking of going back to see her. Ben realised I was heading on a collision course with my wife and that I was going to end up blowing everything, and once again he had a long hard chat with me and told me there is no winner in this one and I had to get a grip. So Ben hung up the phone and thought he had done a good job sorting me out. A few days later, Ben decided to check in on me to make sure I was okay, and to his shock and horror, he found out that I was in Dublin Airport and heading back to see Joe for another 2 weeks. Crazy, right? He couldn't believe it and immediately thought I had dumped the wife and the kids, but to his amazement, I told him I had told my wife that I was going through a midlife crisis, was depressed and needed to take off travelling again for 2 weeks to get over it, and unbelievably and reluctantly she agreed to let me go. So I'd been gone 2 weeks, home for 2 weeks and heading back off for 2 more weeks. I couldn't believe that I had just pulled this one off. I also had the blessing from my work boss and good friend who realised I was in depression, and he was happy to let me have 2 more weeks off as long as I come back with my head cleared, and that I would have to make it up by doing more hours when I got back to work. I told my wife and boss that I was going to travel to Europe and I would be fine once I had time to chill. Unbelievably, but true, they gave me their blessing and I headed to the airport where I said there was a ticket to Barcelona waiting for me. But I had different plans and told Ben I was heading back to Pattaya to see Joe. When Ben heard this, he was speechless and tried to talk sense into me, but it was just a waste of time. He told me that I was going to get caught and mess everything up, but I told him my mind was made up and I was going. Ben said he was just happy he was out of Ireland and didn't have to witness the car crash which was about to unfold.
Are you stupid or something?
So I called Joe from the airport and told her I was on my way back and would she meet me in Bangkok airport in 15 hours. She was ecstatic and immediately went to her bar to tell all her friends what had just happened. Joe's ranking in the bar immediately elevated her up the social ladder, and although still was young, 18 years of age, she gained total respect from her work friends. 15 hours later, I landed in Bangkok, and when I went through the arrival section, I seen Joe looking stunning and all smiles. I ran up to her like a love-struck puppy, and before I knew it, I went down on one leg and proposed to her. Yes, I know what everyone was saying, and yes, they were right. So she immediately said yes, and I couldn't believe what had just happened. I had previously told Joe I had kids and was getting divorced, which she was cool with. I didn't have a ring to give her yet, but I said we would go to the jewellers once we get to Pattaya. And like a true pro, she told me she would have to have a ring to show her bar friends once she announced the engagement.
We are looking for a ring for me, ring for her, bracelet for her, and necklace for her. It's been overwhelming for me. Such a cultural difference.
Yeah, cultural difference.
Now I was totally okay with that, but in my head, I was already thinking what I was going to tell my wife when I got home. I decided to think about that on the flight back to Dublin in 2 weeks, and I didn't give it another thought until then. We had a wonderful night back in the hotel, and I realised my depression had vanished, and I was feeling this buzz of energy and excitement for what the future held. Next day, Jo wanted to go shopping for rings and got me up early for breakfast. She had the jewellers already picked out, and as soon as breakfast was over, she arranged for a taxi to take us there. To my surprise, she went for a moderately priced engagement ring, and I was happy with that. It was only 20,000 baht, and I put it on my personal credit card that my wife had no access to. Fortunately, my bills were paperless, so there was no paper statement trail to get me caught. I paid for the ring, and she put it on, and we left for her bar to show all her friends. After we hit the bar, we made arrangements to head up north during the week and meet the family. I paid her bar fine for the 2 weeks she was going to be missing, and we chilled hanging in Pattaya for a few days, and then booked 2 flights to Isan. Jo called one of her 3 brothers to see if he would pick them up at the airport. He agreed, and she said she would be there tomorrow. Next day, we head back to the airport. On the flight to Isan, Jo decided it was time to talk to me about Sin Sod. She told me it was a Thai tradition and I would have to discuss it with her father. I was vaguely aware of Sin Sod, but never really looked into it. But I told Jo that it wasn't a problem. We had a dowry culture in the west of Ireland until about 50 years ago, so I just accepted it as a Thai tradition. Jo's brother was waiting for us when we arrived. He immediately took a liking to me, which made Jo very happy. His English was better than Jo's, and we had a conversation about football, music and Thailand. We had a 2-hour drive to the village and to Jo's family home. Now, when I got there, I was a little intimidated at the remoteness of the place. I brought in to meet the family. Her young baby, who was 1 year old, was introduced to me, and I was struck at how little time Jo seemed to have for the baby. It wasn't something I was used to seeing back home, but I realised the huge cultural differences and just went with it. After introductions, I was sat down with the family, and I got this feeling of surrealness. I still couldn't believe how the last week had worked out. Jo and I left because Jo had arranged for us to stay in a local guest house built on stilts not far from the family home. We settled in and Jo told me she needed money for an engagement party next day. The whole family, including cousins, aunts, uncles, friends, etc., would all be there. She asked me for 8,000 baht, and she said she would go shopping for food and booze the next day. The morning arrived and we were still in La La Land and still completely head over heels in love. I actually felt very comfortable in the village and still hadn't thought about what was going to happen when I returned to Ireland. We spent some time with the baby and I took to him straight away. I realised how completely different Jo was compared to my wife back home. I was so in love with her, and I wasn't really thinking of the trouble that lied ahead for me back home. We went for a bike ride around the local village, and at one stage Jo asked me if I was thirsty. I said yes, and suddenly she stopped the bike at a coconut tree and began to climb the tree in her bare feet to get me a coconut to drink from. This amazed me, as it was so far from what I was used to back home. Welcome to Thai village life. Jo then told me that I needed to talk to her father before the party about Sin Sod. I was expecting to have a chat with the father, but he had no English, but Jo said her uncle spoke decent English and he would act as a translator and mediator. Dum dum dum. Jo dropped me off at the family home and headed off to the market to get all the food and prepare for the party. I met the father and uncle and they immediately opened a bottle of Mekong whiskey. It was still early morning and I am not really a whiskey drinker, but I decided to man up and drink with them out of politeness. After a few drinks, I started to loosen up, and before I knew it, everyone was getting on great and having a laugh and telling stories. Then the Sinsod discussion came along. I had been thinking about this all morning and had no real idea of how it would go.
Fellas, look what I found in my pocket. Look, a year's salary right here. What I call them? Fun coupons. See that? A fun coupon.
The father told the uncle to tell me that the price of the dowry was based on the age of his daughter, her looks and what he would lose as income, etc. He then dropped a bombshell. The father set the Sinsod at 1 million baht, which is approximately 35,000 euros. My heart sunk, but I didn't show it, and I was thinking this was way over what I was expecting. Now this had changed my thinking a bit, but I decided to go along with it, but told the father that I didn't have 1 million baht at the moment, but I was going to set Joe up with a local shop and stock, so she would be able to earn a decent wage from it with future thoughts of setting up more. I also told the father I would buy some land and build a home for her and the family, and also give the father a sum of money, still to be discussed. They seemed to be happy enough with that and started to celebrate more. That was a huge relief to me, but I didn't know how I was going to achieve this. After a few more Mekongs, I was totally wasted and called Joe to pick me up so I could have a sleep before the party. By the time she arrived, I was completely bombed and she barely managed to get me back to the guest house. That night, a big party was had by all and everybody was having a great time. I bet they was. Now Joe introduced me to her friends, male and female, and I was immediately struck at how young they all were, and I started to feel a little out of my comfort zone. I seen how different she behaved around them compared to what I had seen in Pattaya, and this started to click things in my mind. The next day, Joe's father had a chat with her and told her what I had proposed as part of the Sinsod. When she returned to the guest house, she asked me about the offer of building a family house and setting up a business. She was absolutely delighted and couldn't believe how things had progressed. I was thinking the same thing and realised things were getting a bit out of control, and I was beginning to think I was definitely out of my depth. The next morning, Joe woke up early and told me she has to show me something. We jumped on the moped and she drove a short distance and stopped at a field. She told me that the family knew the local farmer and he was willing to sell him some land to build a house for 100,000 baht. And what did I think? It was now I realised things are progressing way too fast and I started to get a small bit concerned. Just a small bit, Davey, yeah? Just a small bit. Why will... What are you on about? You are busy. He's happy. While we were looking at the land, Joe's older sister, May, turned up on her moped. She was 23 and had an Australian boyfriend. Told you it was going to be hard, this, guys. As the two sisters were talking about where to put the house, May's phone rings. It was her Aussie boyfriend. She chatted to him for a while and then said he wanted to talk to me. We introduced ourselves and start chatting, and the Aussie asked me when I would be coming back as he wanted to try to get to meet me in the village. He was also building a house for the sister and thought it would be great for us to get together for a proper chat. I said I wasn't sure, but would get his number from May and chat with him in a few weeks. While I was talking to May's boyfriend, I sneakily asked the boyfriend what money he was sending to May per month. He told me that he was sending approximately 30,000 baht a month, as his father was a big building contractor in Melbourne and money was no problem. My heart skipped a beat as I realised that I was going to have to find 30,000 baht a month to take Joe out of the bar and back to the village. Not good news, but I decided not to think about it for the moment. The next afternoon, the father, the uncle and myself go for a walk in the village, and the father thanks me for rescuing his daughter from Pattaya. He said he didn't want her to work there, but she had a baby, no husband, and needed to support him and the family. He asked me, through the uncle, how much I would be sending the daughter every month. As I was being put into a corner, I knew I had to match or closely match what the Australian was sending, so I said 25 to 30,000 baht, which seemed to make the uncle and father very happy. And I bet it did, David. Myself and Joe were heading back to Pattaya the next day, and the family had a big dinner arranged that evening. To my shock, one of the brothers arrived home with dinner. He just shot a big snake, and again I felt way out of my comfort zone. I ate it and thought it tasted like very tough chicken. The time had come for myself and Joe to leave the village and head back to Pattaya. We had a week left before I had to head home, and I planned to make the best of it. On the flight back to Bangkok, Joe explained to me that I would have to pay to take her out of the bar, as the mama-san had now lost a girl. I agreed and said I understood. She also told me we would have to have an engagement and leaving party at the bar before she goes. Again, I'm okay with that. We landed in Bangkok and jumped in a taxi back to Pattaya. We booked into our original hotel and then headed off to her bar. She called ahead and had the bar decorated for an engagement party that was arranged for that evening. I gave her 5,000 baht to cover the party, and then we went clothes shopping for Joe, as she says she needed a new dress for the party. Another 3,000 baht later, and she gets kitted out for the party. Great time is had by all, and then Joe mentions I had to pay the bar another 4,000 baht in compensation for taking her out of the bar and back to the village. Again, I paid the bar for Joe. Costs were starting to mount up, and I started to realise this was a very, very expensive gig. We continued to have a great time for the last 5 days, and it was soon time for me to leave. We went our separate ways, but before we did, I told her I would be over as soon as I got the divorce from my wife. I headed to the airport for my Dublin flight, and Joe packed her stuff up from her room in Pattaya and headed back to the village via a flight from Bangkok, which I had booked for her. Just before I departed, I called my wife to say I was on my way home. She was delighted. I was on my way back and said everyone couldn't wait to see me. That made me feel worse now after what's just gone on in the past 2 weeks. Guilt was kicking in fast. My flight to Dublin via Amsterdam had been delayed, and that was the first time in 2 weeks that I'd had time to think properly. I was getting a reality check and thinking about all the money that I was going to have to acquire per month to keep Joe in the village. 3,000 baht to Joe, 30,000 baht to Joe per month. And then there's the land, house, business and money for the father that I had promised. What about my civil service job? Where was I going to live? The penny was starting to drop. I also had a good wife and 4 kids in Ireland who didn't deserve any of this craziness. While on the plane home, I realised that things had gotten way out of control and I was out of my depth. I did the math and knew there was no way I couldn't make good on all the promises I had made in Thailand. I put my head in my hands and decided that I didn't have much options but to backtrack on my promises. I was absolutely gutted and felt heartbroken about Joe, as I might have to cut her loose, and also I felt disgusted with what I'd done to my family. The flight landed and I got into my car at the long-term parking and drove from Dublin to Galway. My wife and kids were delighted to see me and I played the happy game to cover my tracks. My wife asked about the trip and I told her I travelled a few countries in Europe and just relaxed and tried to get out of my depression. She bought it and as it was after midnight, I hit the bed. Next morning, I woke up feeling sick to my stomach about the situation I had gotten myself into with my family and also Joe's. My wife came into the bedroom with a big Irish breakfast, and the guilt was killing me. She was being so nice to me, especially after all the crap I had put her through. After I had eaten, I switched on my phone and checked my messages and seen half a dozen messages from Joe, along with missed calls, and she was wondering where I was and if I was okay. She was wondering why I hadn't called her. I told the wife I was going for a walk, and once I was far enough away from the house, I called Joe. She was delighted to hear from me, but sensed a different tone in my voice. I told her it was just the thought of not seeing her for a few months and she bought it. I was basically bottling it. She then asked me when would I be sending her some money, as she was now back in the village and has no income to support the family. I explained I was going to send money next week, so she sent me her Western Union account details. I went back to work, and again I put a brave face on, and my boss was totally cool with everything. Over the next week, Joe continually texted or called me. I had her number on silent so not to draw attention at home, but I did call her when I was driving, but I hadn't told her about the huge mistake I'd made. I knew when I finally did tell Joe, I had second thoughts that it would be a very bad outcome. Weeks had passed and Joe was wondering when the money that I promised was coming. I finally sent her 10,000 baht, and although Joe was happy with that for the moment, I knew that I couldn't keep sending money. After checking my finances for the last 6 weeks, I realised I had spent way more than my lifestyle would allow, and I couldn't send any more money to Joe. After all, I had a big mortgage, a wife, and 4 kids to support in Ireland. The game was up and I was going to have to drop Joe and call off the engagement. The worry was kicking in and I couldn't sleep at night. After another week, I decided that things couldn't go on like this much longer. Today was D-Day, and I was going to tell Joe I couldn't leave my kids behind in Ireland and move to Thailand. She completely flipped out and started screaming down the phone and abused me. I knew I deserved everything she threw at me. After 10 minutes of ranting, I again apologised, but she wasn't finished. She told me she would lose face back home and lose face if she goes back to the bar in Pattaya, and that basically I had destroyed her life. She warned me if she ever seen me again in Pattaya that she would have her brothers come down from the north and sort me out properly. At that point, I hung up the phone. I was absolutely pig sick for what I had done to Joe, as I was still madly in love with her, but I knew it wasn't practical for me to keep seeing her. It would mean financial ruin everywhere. I also realised I probably couldn't go anywhere near Pattaya again for fear of repercussions. Now over the next week, I got dozens of texts from Joe, and they were not pretty. She was angry as hell. Eventually, I decided to block her number and try to blank the whole ordeal out of my mind and go back to normal living with my wife and kids. After a few months, I decided to send Joe a text to see if she was okay. To my surprise, she replied. She was still mad as hell with me, but had some understanding as to why I couldn't leave my kids. She was back working in a different bar in Pattaya, and also told me she never wanted to hear from me again. She also told me that she called off the threat to have her brothers sort me out, as she didn't want them getting into trouble with the police. The end. Guys, and then David decides to give us an update. He basically states, Joe is now 25 years old. She's been married twice, made a lot of money from the marriages, and is engaged for the 4th time now to a 56-year-old American. I managed to contact her via Facebook this year to see how she was doing, and she actually replied to me. She said she learned a huge lesson after what I had done to her and swore it would never happen again. She said I made her tough as nails and made her who she was today, and it probably contributed to a huge lack of trust with phalanx and why she's going for husband number 3. I'm still married and living in Galway. I still venture to Pattaya to party with my mates most years, but I will never end up doing what I've done with Jo. I still think about her. I still feel a layer of guilt for what I had done, and rightly so. Wow guys, that was an epic story. A lot of detail went into that one, and this kind of stuff, I think a lot of us know, goes on all the time. You're married back home, you got 4 kids, you've been married for like 10 years, and things get boring. They all get boring in marriages. You have to work on a marriage to keep it spiced up and to keep the flame alive so you don't go wandering. But there's so many married men that come to Thailand and places like Pattaya to play with the girls. Now this was Davy's first time, and he met an 18-year-old girl who was stunning. Yeah, a lot of them are in soy 6, and he just fell in love with the boom boom, and then everything snowballed from that point, and he did follow her like a puppy dog. But when he realised that this woman was going to cost him a bloody fortune, he had a reality check, realised that he couldn't afford it, and obviously decided to hit the eject button out of Thailand and to remain in Ireland. But he still ventures to Pattaya, but at least he doesn't get involved. Now I know a lot of people won't have any sympathy for Davy, as he's married, he's got 4 kids, he's got responsibilities, he should have never done this in the first place. But I'm sure there's a lot of people out there as well that can have some understanding that when you've been married for that length of time, you got 4 kids, you just go into work, you're providing for your family, next minute you're in Pattaya, you're in soy 6, and an absolute stunning woman is all over you, happy to give you the best boom boom of your life. So guys, just as a final statement, if you're going to go for a woman who's stunningly beautiful and super young, like 18, 19, 20, 21, etc., you're going to have to pay for it, especially when you meet them in soy 6 or in Pattaya. They're going to try and milk you dry. The family were ecstatic about Davy because he was literally basically telling them everything that they wanted to hear. Building houses, buying land, setting up businesses, giving a 30,000 monthly salary to the daughter. They've got another guy who's paying 30,000 for their other daughter. That's 60,000 a month income that's coming in. They're all building houses, they're all buying land, yeah. It's bloody, the family feel like they've won the bloody jackpot. So I can understand why they were ecstatic and very happy with this guy. For me, Davy, you don't need to feel so guilty. I mean, this woman was just literally with you for your money. I know it's probably what you don't want to hear it, but she was out to milk you dry, mate, and you just went along with the flow. You didn't have any understanding of Thailand or Thai women. It was your first time here, and you got love struck. You fell in love with a gorgeous, beautiful woman, like so many others do. And then if you've got the money, you're just going to throw that money out there, because what can that money do for your happiness? This woman's doing everything for your happiness. You don't care about that money anymore. But when reality really kicks in and you realise that, wow, I can't afford this, or reality kicks in, would have kicked in later if you could, and then you realise that you're just getting milked and she's cheating with young Thai guys, or she's speaking to other phalanx, that would have happened in the future, because she's bloody 18. She just wants to party, have fun, enjoy herself, but she's also got those obligations to provide for a family, etc. So it would have worked out very, very bad for you if you decided to leave your wife and kids, sell your home or whatever, and then feed this woman all your money, go broke like a lot of other people have done, and then your life would have been absolutely destroyed. But I'll tell you one thing, Davy, for the story that you've sent in and for you to be so open and honest, I have to give you respect for that. There's not many men that will admit what you've admitted. And I know there's a lot of men around that come to Thailand that have been through your similar situation, mate. So I do appreciate you sharing your story with everyone. It helps teach people what goes on here and how much you can get milked by a very beautiful young woman here in Thailand. Now guys, if you want to share your story and you can take the time out to type up an email and send it in to us, then please do so and email thaitalkwithdan@gmail.com. Now, I've got to go and take care of my son. He's been running around crazy, very happy. I've been stopping the video and going taking care of him and sorting him out. But yeah, guys, I'm enjoying myself. It's quite fun to have him with me every day, to be honest. And he really enjoyed swimming and stuff yesterday. It was really good. I'll post some videos on the shorts on YouTube Shorts so you can see what we've been up to. I'll try and get that done today. But apart from that, guys, thanks for watching. Thanks for being a subscriber. Thanks for being a member of the channel. And thanks for supporting my journey here on YouTube. I really do enjoy getting back into these videos and making them. And hopefully I can keep doing them every single day. Okay, guys. Ciao for now. Take it easy. Bye-bye.